Got to hit got it too. Got it and got it. Parrysound.ca, and I will acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people under the Robinson Huron Treaty and the waterways traveled by the Métis of this region. So, and I just had notification that my internet may be unstable, so hopefully it's good. All right, so and no additions or with regard to the agenda. Mover and seconder for the agenda is circulated. Councillor McCann, Councillor Bachman, special council agenda for February 22nd, 2022 be approved as circulated. All in favor? That's carried. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Nope. Okay. Let's see here. So the next is operating budget, and moved by Councillor Burden and second by Councillor Keith that the 2022 operating and capital budgets be approved and that the budget bylaw be brought forward to a future council meeting for ratification. Okay, we got that read out of the way, and Mr. Harris, you wanted to say a couple things.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just some opening remarks. Each year, the fiscal challenges faced by the town have changed, but the one goal that remains the same is that we present an operating and a capital budget that's responsible. We want to maintain service levels, and we want to consider all other sources of revenue before we even consider a tax rate increase. So those are our guiding principles as staff each year, and certainly this year for sure. The budget being presented tonight is being recommended by the senior leadership team. So there's been a lot of involvement across the organization, and this is a budget, capital and operating that's supported by all departments. The tax increase required to fund town operations is well below the rate of inflation. If you've looked at the package, you'll know what I'm referring to. And it's well below the low end of the range, the guidelines that council set in the fall. So I think collectively, it's something that we felt very comfortable in recommending to council. The presentation also includes a couple of options. If council wishes to consider a tax increase lower than what is recommended this evening. So there's a couple of options for council to consider. The list of capital projects for 2022 is part of the budget package, and there's no tax increase associated with any of those capital projects other than the 1.8% increase that council has been adding for infrastructure repair and maintenance, repair and replacement annually for the last number of years. So other than that 1.8%, which council is very familiar with by now, there's no other increase in the property taxes attributable to capital projects. That was a question that was raised when we discussed the capital budget at the last meeting, and it was deferred to this meeting. So before I turn it over to the Director of Finance for her presentation, I'd like to thank Ms. Phillips and her finance team for their work in leading the budget process this year, and as well senior leadership team and all the staff in the town that made it possible to bring together a budget to present to council and the public this evening that we think is very responsible, and hopefully council feels comfortable approving and adopting it. But we're certainly here to answer any questions. And unless there's any questions at this point, I'll just turn it over to Ms. Phillips.
There was just one comment, and I don't know whether Ms. Phillips is going to actually touch on it or not, but I found it interesting in the operating budget overview. And that is that town services, like out of the operating budget, town services represent 58.4% of the property tax bill. 26.5% are funds, services and external levies, and 15.1% is provincial education. So out of that 100%, okay, that we collect, there's a lot goes to external sources other than directly back into the community, which I found rather interesting. So, and people should be aware of that. Ms. Phillips. There you are.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so just bear with me as I get my presentation shared here.
While you're doing that, I was just going to say there's a lot of interesting information within the budget that you put in there, comparison to other communities and that sort of thing as well, which I thought was really good, and it's rather enlightening.
Thank you. Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. All right, good evening, council and the public. Welcome to the 2022 draft budget presentation. So tonight I'll present the 2022 budget overview and the impact to the taxpayer. And then here, I'll skip forward and I'll just show you the agenda here. And then I'll show the historical tax rate increases and do a recap of the capital budget and present the tax supported budget funding as well as by service area. I'll identify COVID-19 pandemic fiscal challenges and list how COVID-19 funding has been budgeted for use in 2022. Then we'll work our way through the summary of net levy changes by division, and I'll explain variances, and staff will answer any questions that you might have there. Then council will go through the items for consideration, and those items can be brought forward by a member of council or the public, and staff are seeking direction or confirmation for each item on those. And then staff has also provided a couple options to council to further reduce tax rate, and council may consider and provide direction or confirmation on those options, as well as the community may be facing increasing costs with rising inflation during the pandemic as well. So that was on the consideration. Okay. Okay, so the 2022 budget overview. So the town requires $344,974 in additional funds in 2022. That is a 2.95% tax rate increase net of growth. So town operating budget items are about 0.61% of that. The museum would be 0.04%. Parry Sound Public Library, there's a levy increase request there, and that amounts to 0.5% of the increase. And then capital levy would be 1.8%, and that's per council policy, as we've yearly we contribute more to infrastructure replacement. Oh, a moment. So some other key impacts on the budget, those include $50,000 in insurance premium increases. So that's the impact on tax supported operations. And municipalities continue to face 20 to 30% increases as a result of the hard insurance market. So that's typical of what municipalities are looking at right now. $16,000 towards land ambulance levy. That's one of the other impacts. And during the pandemic, we're facing rising costs with inflation, which was at about 5.2% as of December 2021. And the COVID-19 pandemic has created some other challenges, including mitigating lost revenues, pandemic supply costs, the cost of screeners to meet public health guidelines, increasing inflation, as I mentioned, and limited assessment growth. So that's at 74,000, which is about 2/3 of what the town might get in a typical year. Okay. All right, so the impact to the taxpayer. So the taxpayer will pay 41.93 per year, or $3.49 additional per month for every 100,000 in residential assessment, and this is the impact of a 2.95% increase, and that's how. On the next slide here, this shows you how you can calculate the impact of for your property assessment. So the average home in Parry Sound is assessed at 186,000, or that's the median. So if you use your assessment, divide that by 100,000 and times it by the 4193, you can estimate what your annual taxation increase would be. In this case, this taxpayer will pay $77.99 more per year, or $650 additional per month. Okay, so historical tax rate increases. So what this table shows is that in this term of council, the operating rate increases have been less than inflationary levels for the most part. In 2021, we did not have a collective agreement yet. So in the absence of that, the guideline was set at 1.8%. So the operating increase was still less than the 1.8% at that time. So this year, back in July, the guidelines were set with inflation at 3.5%, which is what inflation was in July at that time. And since then, it's risen to about 5.2% as of December 2021. So staff promised to endeavor to propose a budget less than the 3.5%. And so far for operating, what's proposed today is 1.15%. Yeah. Okay, any questions so far? No, okay. Okay, so the 2022 capital budget recap. So the 2022 draft capital budget includes 7.1 million in carry forward projects and 6.5 million in new projects. This is 13.6 million in total. 5.3 million is funded from grants and 7.9 million from reserves or reserve funds. And the levy increase is 1.8% towards infrastructure replacement as per the council policy. And this year, more is planned to go towards future infrastructure replacement. So the transfers to reserves are increasing in 2022. So the 2022 operating budget. What this slide shows is funding sources for the tax supported budget. So 10,184,839 in property taxation. That amounts to 66% of the funding for the operating budget. The other 34% is supported through provincial grants, user fees, and investment earnings and different types of revenues. Okay, and this chart shows the net budget by service area. So 27% of municipal taxation dollars go towards external boards, levies, and district services. And then transportation is the next largest at 14% of the net budget. And that's followed by waste management and fire protection, which are both pretty close to 6%. So those make up the highest pieces of the budget. COVID-19 pandemic fiscal challenges. So there's been ongoing closures to recreation and culture facilities due to public health guidelines. And throughout the pandemic, there's been impacts to programming revenues, facility revenues, or user fees. So some of those impacts in Parks and Rec, those are continuing into 2022. The Stocky Center and Bobby Orr Hall of Fame, they're aiming for a return to normal revenue levels for 2022. So within their budget, they've strived for that and worked to control costs within what the revenues would be with the new normal with their plans. So also inflationary pressures will impact the cost of raw materials, utilities, and services in 2022. And investment earnings have been impacted by low interest rate, but they're just slightly higher than what was in the 2021 budget. So we are still planning for that to increase a bit. Cost of screeners have been required to operate the BOCC safely, and those were required under the public health guidelines. So that's one of the impacts within the operating budget as a result of the pandemic. Okay, other budget impacts. So as previously mentioned, insurance increases, external levy increases, and interest on new long-term debt for Wabic, Isabella at $67,000. These are some of the operating impacts in 2022. But despite these impacts, the town is doing well in managing revenues and costs. So it will only require 0.6% tax increase for controllable town operations. And this compares favorable to inflation and other measures. So the balance of the increase is from external boards and agencies and other impacts.
Question?
Yes. Is there a question?
Yeah, from me, Doug. If you could go back to the last slide when you mentioned the Stocky Center expecting to return to normal revenues. How do you describe those? Because you also mentioned new normal levels. So how would you define what those levels that the staff at the Stocky Center are expecting this year then?
So we'll go into detail within the variances of the Stocky Center Bobby Orr Hall of Fame, but I know that they have implemented some new virtual technologies and things like that. So the types of events might change in the programming, but they are still planning to be using the facility more with things opening up. So once we get into that, is Nicole still on the meeting tonight? Because I could defer that to her to speak about what's planned for the Stocky Center in 2022. Or I know she was maybe, might have had to step out. If she did, Caitlin is here.
Oh.
Mrs. Dyer? Oh, you're there,
I'm
Nicole?
here.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Through you, Mr. Mayor and Stephanie, thank you. The budget this year is reflective of a more normal return to programming that we're anticipating. The current restrictions have put us in a way better position this year than in previous years. We were only precluded from hosting events for the month of January, which is usually a slow month for us anyway. So we have a lot planned this year, and the revenues are reflective of that, as are the expenses. But of course, we continue to take direction from the province and Ontario Public Health. And if we have to pivot our operations again to align with the restrictions, we'll do that accordingly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Okay. So the estimated amounts remaining in COVID-19 funding has been applied to the 2022 budget to fund COVID-19 impacts or to assist with pandemic-related costs and pressures. So these are some of the areas where the funding's been applied. So 17,000 was applied to the Stocky Center. And almost 60,000 applied to lost revenues at the BOCC, and 15,660 towards BOCC screeners, 13,200 parks and recreation lost revenues, 29,000. So most of these are continuations of what was funded in 2021 as well. So 29,000 went to COVID-19 bylaw enforcement, and 17,700 towards organization-wide sick time and lost time from COVID-19. So that's just an estimate at this time. We don't, things have been going well. We don't have a lot of that right now, but it can be anticipated that there could be some over time. And 20,300 towards pandemic supplies and expenses, so PPE, cleaning, and things like that. So overall, that's 172,727. So we're estimating that the majority of that COVID-19 funding will be utilized in 2022, and the pandemic hopefully will not continue past 2022. Or as people work more to the return to normal, hopefully in 2023. Okay, so summary of changes to the net levy by division. So this is in page 35 of your budget book. So I'll just work through each of the divisions and explain the variances in here one by one. Okay, so mayor and council. So there's a bit of a reduction there. The majority of that is, so the IT chargeback in that area has been reduced by 7,829. So that's some of the reason for the reduction, and that's just based on an update to that calculation on which is created using the number of devices in every department, the costs and IT department allocated out based on the devices. So that's just one of the impacts there. And in 2022, there's a contribution from reserves of 20,000. And this is for planning for the election. So each year we contribute 5,000 or around there towards the election. And then in an election year, we would transfer that back out of the reserve to cover the cost of that. So that's what we're doing in 2022 budget. The costs of the election are estimated in the budget at 20,826, and that's based on over the last couple of years, like average costs as well as what we know is coming. As well, the coat of arms project is carried over to 2022, so that's still going on, and that's a transfer from reserve. There's an increased mayor and council remuneration, 4,523, and that's based on a bylaw that was passed previously from council, where each year the increase is applied based on CPI. And there's a small decrease within that area of the budget as well, related to WSIB, which is Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. So those premiums don't apply to elected officers. So we've removed that from the 2022 budget. But there's also a cost for accident insurance that's purchased through our insurance company in 2022 for the first year. And that's 1,514, and that's to provide coverage in the absence of those WSIB coverages. that's one of the changes there. And then the CAO, Office of the CAO. So there's a number of variances in here. So OMPF funding, that's a grant that the town receives. So that's going up by 77,300 in 2022. POA facility rentals fees, those are going down, so by 25,600. And that's just due to virtual court and less use of for in-person court dates. And also the town share of POA fines is going up by 6,000. So as fine revenues are increasing as virtual court and some in-person resumes in 2022, and ticket issuance is expected to increase from 2021 to 2022. Investment earnings up 28,000. Marriage license revenues, so that was an increase there of 2,000, and that's to reflect actual revenues for marriage licenses over the last couple of years. Transfers from reserves. So there's a 185,000 impact within the 2022 budget for an estimated organization-wide impact of non-union salary review that was approved to proceed in 2022. But half of this is funded from the general working reserves or 2021 surplus. So there's half of the impact is in 2022. Also, the cost of completing the non-union market review project was of 30,000 estimated, was funded from the general working reserves or non-union or for which will come from the 2021 surplus as well. So those costs are in the 2022 budget. The reserve contributions here, there's an increase of approximately 45,000, and that is the town's contribution towards the West Parry Sound Recreation and Cultural Center. So in 2021, we contributed 30,000 to a reserve, and in 2022, we've increased that by 45,000 to contribute 75,000. And this is to help phase in the operating impact of the center to avoid a large increase in the year of opening. So each year we'll transfer an amount to a reserve, and then until we've accumulated what we think the operating cost annually could be, rather than taking 1 year, taking the entire increase hit in 1 year. So we're planning for that right now. That's included within the budget. All right, economic development. So half of the year of economic development admin assistant is in the proposed budget here, and council approved that back in 2021. And the remainder of any wage increase is related to 1.5% for unionized positions and 1.1% for non-union positions within the budget. So contracted services, that's just an increase related to the interpreter for welcoming cruise ship visitors. So that's included in the economic development budget. So moving on, in the emergency and protective services, there is 18,800 in costs within that budget, but those costs relate to materials, COVID-19 pandemic supplies and expenses expected in 2022, and those are funded from the COVID-19 reserves. So that's why it's showing as a net zero there. fire services. So fire permits are up 2,200 in 2022 budget. And some of the other impacts there are just salaries and benefits, so 1.1% related to non-union and 1.5% for union staff, as well as an insurance cost impact of 4,736 and increased legal costs expected of 3,975, and that for outstanding fire-related issues expected to incur costs in 2022. Okay, bylaw enforcement. So just a small change there. And that relates to there's an increase in parking permit revenues expected of 5,500, and parking fines are to increase by 3,000. So that's a bit of a recovery of lost revenues previously. And lottery licensing revenues, those have shown a decline, so that's decreased by 4,000. And then salaries and benefits, just 4,944. That's the impact of the 1.1% for non-union and 1.5% for union staff. As I go through these, I guess if you have a question, I'll try to see if I'll try to monitor whether your hand is up there, or just please go ahead and interrupt if you do have a question in the middle of this. Okay. Okay, so on to building. So in 2022, building fees are projected to go up by 95,000. So this increase is based on anticipated building projects in 2022 and the associated revenue due to the scale of the project. So that's going up there. That's gone a long way towards within the 2022 budget as well. So it's becoming closer to cost recovery in that department. So that's really good news. Within the planning budget, so we have the development charges study that's been deferred to 2022, so that's still ongoing, and that's within the 2022 budget. Facade improvement program, 40,000 is budgeted there for that program. And yeah, those were the only notable items within that area, or aside from just the salaries and benefit impact of the increase of 3,000. There was a reduction in contracted services of 13,500, and this directly relates to work which was completed at the salt docks in 2021. So it's no longer required in 2022. So development, no major impact there within the budget, so I'll just move forward. Okay. Transportation. So a street scan project is planned in 2022, and that costs about 50,000. So every few years, we would be updating the data, which helps provide us with information to prioritize infrastructure replacement, and we'll feed information into our asset management planning as well. 40,000 is a project towards construction standards This is to update construction standards policy that will define what is required for new developments and infrastructure projects. So that is to create a bit of standardization there. Gravel surface maintenance. 8,000 is not required for that in 2022. 8,000 is budgeted to go towards the costs of maintenance and repair of the Welcome to Parry Sound sign, or the highway town of Parry Sound sign in 2022. Insurance cost impact of 7,819 in this area. Training renewal program to take place in 2022. So this is core training for operators. And the debt repayment for Wabick and Isabella Street capital projects are within this budget as well. Winter control, so there's not really much of a notable change there for 2022, just small cost increases. Stormwater control, same here. So that's just salaries and benefits and internal recovery costs, which are like equipment costs, which are allocated based on the usage of equipment. And that includes inflationary impacts on those costs as well. Waste management. So within this section, the waste diversion funding has been increased for 2022. That went up by 83,100. Also, the food cycler composting program was budgeted in 2022. The revenues are included, which are estimated at 15,000, and then the associated costs of the inventory and shipping of 27,000 is budgeted in 2022 as well. Recycling contracted service costs were increased by 45,000 within the budget, and those are expected to go up with anticipated inflationary increases as well as the cost of household hazardous waste contracted services, which is up 20,000 within the budget. Some of those costs are recoverable, so that's also been updated. Cemetery, that is just small costing impacts of salaries and wages and things like that. Information technology, there are, so the GIS technician within the 2022 proposed budget, that position's moved from a part-time shared complement to a full-time resource. So the GIS maturity study emphasized the importance of a full-time dedicated resource to this technology. So that's within the budget that's been proposed and essential to the town's core services supporting infrastructure. Also, climate change intern. So 46,000 has been budgeted towards that, which would be contingent upon 50% funding. So the net impact is 23,000 within the proposed budget. And some cybersecurity training and annual audit requirements have been included within the budget as well. And those are altogether about 31,000, but with the changing landscape, it's costs that we can anticipate that will likely go on past 2022, the annual costs where we continually do maintenance, like scanning and making sure that everything is secure. So those are just with the changing environment, those costs are increasing. GIS strategy, so the modernization grant intake 2, the town's portion is included in here because it was deferred. The project was deferred into 2022 for completion. 1,000 increase of the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve Partners for Climate Change program, and that is for progression through the milestones, and that's $15,000 annual cost for that partnership that's ongoing with FCM. Some modernization projects are included within the budget, and those include phone modernization proof of concept, phase 2, implement council meeting management solution, and project testing. So altogether, that's $24,000. That's budgeted to be transferred from the modernization reserve. And then website maintenance and required upgrades of $9,900 is within the budget as well. And the IT reserve contribution has gone up $16,000, so $10,000 more related to laptop replacement and increasing needs for mobilization, as well as $6,000 just that will go towards future replacement related to some of the buildings like fobs or systems that we have in place.
I have a question. I
Okay.
know, yes, Ms. Phillips, I realize that you're just moving through this lickety split, but my brain has gone back to this modernization project. Can somebody through the mayor explain to me, what's this implement council meeting management solution of the 17,000? Can I get just a brief idea what that is, please?
Thank you. I would like to defer that question to Mr. Pengra. I know he's on the line and he can probably go through that in more detail.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I actually think Rebecca's probably the best to speak to this, as she's been researching various options for essentially this is software for managing how agendas are created and the like. Rebecca, do you want to add something to that?
So some of the solution eScribe is preferred vendor through LAS, Local Authority Services, partnering with AMO. And I know that the software better enables the agenda coming together and follow up from that agenda. So that is something that has been recommended through the review that was undertaken of various initiatives or various IT technology issues, and so is considered an improvement over the current system of PDFs, combining agendas, etc.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Bachman has her hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just to elaborate on that, did we go out to RFP for this software, or what was the recommended, or I know you stated that we go through LOS and a recommendation from AMO, but a lot of times I've found in researching these products that, and specifically this one, because I know I had sent information a couple of years around this specific product to that would be ideal to implement, but I am aware of other products that are less, and I'm just wondering if this is just an estimate, or have we specifically gone with eScribe, or will we be going out to RFP?
Your Worship, I can respond.
Yes, please.
So it is an estimate. It is not something that there hasn't been a contract established, of course, with a vendor yet. I think I was just describing my knowledge of through the report and the review, there was a vendor suggested. And so I have just mentioned that, but of course we would look at that and determine whether we should be going out for tender or proposals.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions on this section?
Nope.
Okay, so on to the municipal office. So there are no notable changes there, just some small impacts of cost of materials, things like that.
Question?
Hmm?
From Doug here, yeah. I was concerned about funds being available this year for improved and enhanced lighting at the intersection of Bowes and Pine Street and also on Queen Street. Now, Mr. Kearns has suggested that that may be workable in the operating budget for 2022, but I just want to make sure that we have funds available to do this and moving forward. I don't know who can speak to that.
I'd like to defer the question to Mr. Kearns if possible.
Okay, great.
Through your worship, certainly I can take that question. So there's some unique challenges in some of those areas, given our power supply that we're still learning, but we had some discussions with our contractor. And yeah, that was how we were looking at being able to improve some of those areas because they are less than standard in terms of available location options. There's some limitations on some of the in the geometry of that those particular intersections, but in speaking with our contractor, we think that we've come up with some solutions that we can certainly fit within our operating budget for the street lighting.
Well, that's great. Perhaps maybe in a future meeting, then we might be able to look forward to some information on moving forward with that. I'm just very passionate about this.
And certainly, through your worship, we can we'll certainly provide council with some more information. It may take some custom fabrication, like I said, because of some of the challenges that we're dealing with, some legacy infrastructure and some other additions in those areas that we have to work around. So, but we'll certainly bring that forward later.
And I think it's of the utmost importance with the new Best Western going in there. There's just only going to be more traffic. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Okay,
Councillor Barneman? Councillor Barneman has his hand up.
thank you.
Councillor McCann always tweaked my thinking there in that process. You know, I've got no issue with enhancing lights wherever we need, but I think if we're going to do this, we need to do it in a systematic sort of way. Mr. Cairns, do we have some sort of an illumination study or idea of where we have these issues, or do we address them piecemeal based on complaints from the public? How do we go about doing these things, just in the interest of fairness and also in consideration of any kind of potential liability that we might have?
Through your worship. So certainly, I would not like to refer to it as issues. There's perhaps some opportunities for improvement in those areas because, for instance, the area of Bow Street, I think everyone's well aware, that used to be the provincial highway coming through there. And when those intersections were redesigned, the engineering standards of the time were utilized to design the crossings, the signalization, the lighting requirements, that sort of thing. In that particular area, there are some challenges with extraneous light as well. I'm certainly not a lighting expert by any stretch of the imagination, but those are some of the things we've looked at. There's probably an opportunity for some improvement there at a relatively low cost. So those are what we're looking at. If we have identified issues, or for instance, if we're redesigning or redoing a street, for instance, we would adhere to the engineering design standards. There are some options that are available, and lighting technology is changing, allowing us to have different lighting patterns show up on the ground, depending on the fixture, the power of the fixture. There's a lot that goes into it as well, because it's not just a matter of overpowering light, it has to be appropriate for the circumstances. So we have not undertaken a study across the municipality I would suggest that that would require some research to understand what the cost of that would be across the municipality, and I would suggest that it's not insignificant.
We're good? Okay. Ms. Phillips, I guess continue on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so do you prefer that I leave it like this for now, since we already know what page we're on, so we can see everyone's faces? Or should I share that again? All right, well, I'll share it for now.
Yeah,
That's
share it.
where I
Yeah.
was. Okay. Okay, can you all see that again? All right, so onto the BOCC. So 15,660 was the cost of the screeners at the BOCC was funded from COVID-19 reserve funding in 2022. And 59,840 of lost revenue similar to 2021 is funded again from those COVID funding reserves. The impact of salaries and benefit increases is just the difference there, which is around 4,000. And that relates to the 1.1% increase for non-union and 1.5% for unionized staff. The impact of rising insurance costs of approximately 5,000 are within the BOCC budget in 2022. Overall, little change there. On to Parks and Recreation. 13,200 in COVID-19 funding is allocated to offset loss in programming revenues due to changes in restrictions and guidelines. 50,000 is shown as a contribution from reserve here, and that's related to the modernization reserves to fund the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. There's a recommended resolution related to DCs for when that project moves forward and that's allocated, and that would be that the growth related component of that study be funded from the DC Reserve Fund once the bylaw has been approved by council and is in effect. So when that one moves forward, it's important to pass that resolution. Salaries and benefits, those costs are up by approximately 14,000, and that relates to the 1.1% increase for non-union and 1.5% for unionized staff. There was also a correction made to the lifeguard complement to include 5 versus 4, and to swim instructors to include 4 versus 5. There was a bit of a transposition error there, so that had a $4,000 impact, the correction. Rising costs of insurance premiums, 1,697. The cost of a booking software of 10,000 is also included within this budget, and it's planned to be funded from the modernization reserves. And utility costs are increasing by 5,000 at Wabano Park. So the budget is reflective of actual costs there. Any questions so far on this stuff? Nothing yet? Okay. All right. So on to finance. Okay. So there's an NOHFC internship position for an asset management coordinator intern budgeted, and the grant for that is 35,000. and the net cost of the funding after the grant is $18,000. Okay. Payments in lieu of taxation, those are increased by 47,000 to be more reflective of the actuals received in 2021 and what's expected in 2022. Supplemental taxation, there's a 30,000 increase within the 2022 budget. And 5 years in supplemental revenues are analyzed to update the estimate based on what we are seeing there. Fines and penalties, small increase of 10,000, new forecasted amount. As well, admin support chargebacks, so that's increased by 17,000, and those are admin fees to support POA, land ambulance, water, wastewater. Those have been increased just per inflationary or labor impacts within the budget. Contribution from the infrastructure replacement reserve of 66,800. That's to go towards the update of the asset management plan, which has been deferred into 2022. And the plan costs are 115,800 altogether. And we're working towards an updated asset management plan for core infrastructure, which is required by July 2022. And less costs in training, copier costs, and office supplies with increased remote work and virtual training, costs of furniture. Those all were decreased. So overall, that's about 24,000 decrease in those items. I think those are the main variants there. All right. So the subtotal for town operations there. Trying to skip to the next slide. Okay. Okay. So 138,231, that's the total of all of the variances on town operations items. And then the services, external levies, boards, or district services. Within this section, there's a contribution of reserve budgeted for almost 103,000. This relates to prisoner transportation grant. So we normally receive a prisoner transportation grant, but we're not sure if that will continue into 2022. We haven't received any communications on that. So we've budgeted a contribution from the police cost stabilization reserve to the amount of what we think that we will receive for the grant, but it's not certain. The land ambulance costs here have increased by 16,000, and this is 6.2%, and that's what's expected in 2022. Growing servicing demands outpacing inflation there. The health unit levy is expected to increase in 2022 by 3.28%. So that's 5,849. Communications received by the health unit identify that it could, the formula could still change from 70%, from 80% provincial, 20% municipal to 70% provincial and 30% municipal, and that change could impact 2023 budget. Because there's no guarantee that the funding from the province will continue there. The OPP costs, those are increasing by 7,170. And the number of properties went from 3428 to $34.69, so there's an increase there. But the calls for service was reduced by 82% from 2019 to 2020, which is good. But that's consistent with provincial totals as well, because there's a decrease in calls for service. Library costs, almost 58,000 increase at the library associated with pay equity review costs of 35,000, reduction of revenues of 16,000, plus an increased transfer to reserves of 3,200 for building computers, elevator, capital. That makes up the majority of the increase requested. The library has a 2-year servicing contracts with the Township of Carling and the Township of Archipelago and the Township of McDougall. So an increase hasn't been worked into the contributions in 2022, but over the 2 years, I guess, at the beginning or at the onset of the contract. West Parry Sound District Museum costs, so the increase there is 5,000 for what's requested for a shortfall in 2021 to help address the unfunded reserve and allow staff and the board to focus on programming for the community. So they've requested a little bit more in 2022. And that's pretty much all of those ones there. So the external levies, boards, district services, that's 70,000 altogether, the impact of that, of those cost increases. Growth is about 74,000 almost. So after that, the operating levy required is 134,215, and the increase for the capital budget is 210,759, and altogether it's 344,972, which is 2.95%. Okay, so there's some items for council consideration for tonight. And
Paul had his hand up. Ms.
oh,
Phillips.
sorry. Here, I'll stop sharing for a moment.
No, that's fine, Ms. Phillips, because it related directly to the top line at the library. And I think we all support the library, but did I hear you right that again, with this increase, that it's solely the taxpayer of the town that will bear the brunt of this, that none of our partners are at this point contributing to the pretty hefty increase that's required this year?
I guess we should ask our board members. Ms. Bachman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, Councillor Borneman. One of the things that the board did do this year is with our partners, again, service contracts, not partners. We negotiated from an annual contract to a 2-year contract. So that enabled us to secure that funding for the following year. As Ms. Phillips stated, we had some costs related to the payback that was required, and through the town was our proxy. So I'm just going to spend just 2 minutes here, because obviously it is a 0.5% increase, which is, compared from 14% with the museum to the 27% with the museum. I want people to really understand the struggle, I would say, Councillor McCann and I have had with this volunteer board that is made up of these service contracts. For one, currently we have $11,000 in the bank. The board owns the land, but in 1964, the property was valued at $10,000, and the mayor at the time gave the board the building for $1. Obviously, over the years, the town has been a significant contributor to the library, and many people will actually classify this as the Town of Parry Sounds Library. Out of all of the municipalities that partner, this facility is not in any municipality's assessment management plan for capital costs. And we've come to a point where we have board members, specifically our service contracts, who actually aren't obligated to partake in the town, well, the Parry Sound Library. They are under a legislation, which again, that is another big factor that plays into the library, because not only are we legislated or municipalities to have this service, we are also legislated to have specific programming and services outside of a library. And as noted, our insurance costs have gone up. We, as the town, used to have a reserve actually for the library, and when the town had paid a significant amount to repairing that facility, that's when those funds were given back. And when you look at the investment that the town made into 2 public washrooms of over $200,000, you can really, get a good idea of the investment that is, or the funding that is required for this. And so what happens with this board is they're no longer feeling that it's their obligation to negotiate these contracts with the service contracts. So our board has been, our chair specifically, Mr. Lundy, and our CAO have been in discussions with Mr. Harris and Ms. Phillips to really look at what is the sustainable approach moving forward for this library that serves those regions or serves those municipalities. And you may be aware that each municipality gets a plug. And this plug, for instance, Carlene's plug, they get $7.2 thousand, but they contribute $48,000. Archipelago's plug is $15,000. They contribute $32,000. McDougall's plug is $7,300, sorry, and they contribute $48,000. So we have these service contracts that really feel they're going above and beyond their contribution. Now, I've made the argument to these service contracts and these board members that could they really provide these services in their own municipalities for a lesser cost? I don't think they can, but that, is not for me to, determine that. I think we need to consider, and I think through the efforts of this board, we raised our staff raised $37,000 this year. They fundraised. In 2021, our budget was $415,000. Or was budgeted at $415,000, and our actual budget was was $443,000. Payroll alone is $352,000. So we have these service contracts paying half of this payroll budget that again goes back to the legislation of requirements that these libraries must have. So I agree, we need to ensure that we move forward and figure out how to ensure that those our service contracts are increased based on these, especially capital costs. I mean, as I've stated previously, we have an HVAC system that is well past its due date of replacement, and I think that's around $50,000. So we can work with the town to continue to go after funding. But again, that is very limited when we have to go after funding for our other infrastructure. So it'd really be interesting is how can we work with our service contracts to maybe go after funding? So I think that there is a lot of opportunity to get back some of that budget moving forward, negotiating. But I think that this council needs to decide where they want their library, what they want of the library, because this board is now in a position where they're saying, well, if we have to have some major costs, how are we going to be sustainable? We've recently had a presentation with a real estate to look at different options of whether we sell the building That is not something the board wants to do, and they don't want to do it alone and make these decisions. They want to partner with the town of Parry Sound because, again, I will go back, we are one of 6 of over 300 libraries that actually own their building. So again, I'm not going to say that, there are a lot of moving parts in this budget and libraries in general of how they operate in a community, and reality is the sustainability, especially when they are not partners, where I understand with the museum, it was West Parry Sound coming together and everybody shares those costs, but that is not the case because these are actually service contracts. So tomorrow we could lose this budget if McDougall and Carling decided that they would put in a library. Now, I don't think that's the case, and I believe that there is a way moving forward, but that has to be a larger discussion with council and staff to better understand the sustainability of this facility.
Well, I'm going to make a comment here, and the museum owns their own building as well, and it is what it is right now. That's but I don't think you're going to get anywhere with the representatives on your board, possibly, with regard to the contracts. You need to go right to the municipalities, and your representatives on that board, and I think that the board itself should be making the decision to make presentation to the various municipalities to see if they can't get a little more funding. And I can't see that their representatives for these contracts are really, I can't see that they're going to say, we're going to jump in and give an increase, because they can't speak for the whole council. So therefore, I think that has to go back to those 3 councils, hat in hand, and say, look, these are the realities of us running a library and the expenses that are happening, repairs that need to be made, cost of COVID, cost of increases, pay equity, you name a variety of different things. But I don't see as where it falls back on the shoulders of the ratepayers of the town of Parry Sound all the time to pick up these costs on this. And the town has contributed over the years a significant amount of money in repairs, that sort of thing. Councillor Keith, you were on the board for many years, you know that as well. And even before Councillor Keith's time, there was money that was definitely ponied up and from the town to improve the building, do different things that were improved and worked on. So moving forward, I mean, if this, I guess it depends on how much this is going to impact our budget. And, but if that exercise can be made to go to those 3 municipalities, explain why, money is needed, and see if you can't get some kind of an apportionment from them to help support this. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, with respect to comments from Councillor Backman, she's dead on, and I couldn't have said it better myself. And with the detail that she has provided, we're certainly at a juncture, or we're certainly at a point here where something needs to be done. Mr. Mayor, I would remind this council and the town of Parry Sound that the library is a Parry Sound library. It is the taxpayers' library. It's not Carling's, it's not McDougall's. Yes, we could go back and ask them for more money. Contract revenue is volatile and it can be precarious, and they can change their mind at the last moment. They can find some way to open up some portion of their municipal building and put a few books in. And Yeah, our library has under Rita Orr has demonstrated that it can keep up with the new millennium. It's reinvented ways to make the library very, how it can. It's invented ways in which the library can embrace the community and vice versa. So I think because the way the legislation is written, the way it is that this is not like the museum, and it's not like the Bobby Orr Community Center or the Stocky Center. This is the Parry Sound Public Library, and I think the onus is on this council and the town to support it. And there's some heavy money going forward. I don't think it's going to happen all at once, but I think that we need to know that down the line. I don't want to see the building sold either. I'd like it to be where it is. It's proven its weight over the years in many, many ways. And as I said, with Rita reinventing and her staff reinventing the way we're making it work today, we have to continue to support this. So it's a nice idea to go back to these townships, 3 of them, and say, we need more money. But at the end of the day, this is our business. This is our concern to deal with.
Okay, Councillor Bachman and then Councillor Borneman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just as a follow-up, I think that's where the discussion needs to happen, is determining and taking responsibility of this entity as the town of Parry Sounds. Now, again, that wasn't something that was clear in the beginning when I joined this board, but over the past few years, that becomes the the heated discussion with these service contracts. And what you've suggested, Mayor McGarvey, has been suggested by both myself and Councillor McCann. I'm willing to go make those presentations myself. But again, that's not what our board, not all of the board, but majority when it comes to vote, that they feel it's their responsibility, because in their eyes, this is the town of Parry Sounds Library, therefore the town should be. Now, if the town wants to, pass resolution or figure out a way, I don't have a problem going in and begging for money. I will do that tomorrow. But again, it is trying to, when we have these service contracts that are voting members and they don't want you coming back to their municipality because they already feel that they have putting in their share, or maybe not seeing it the way myself and Councillor McCann do, it becomes very difficult. But again, so that's why I'm stating that we as a council need to make some decisions. And again, I'm more than willing to go with however council chooses to proceed and go ask for more money. Not a problem.
Councillor Borneman.
Well, yes, the library is in the town of Parry Sound. No, it's not a town building. The Bobby Orr Community Center and the Stocky Center are owned by the town. I was told when I was a young man that if I didn't apply for the job, I wouldn't be considered. And I expect it's the same in this case, that if we don't ask for the money, we won't be considered. And I'll say again, I think that people at this table have proven time and again that we do support the library. And I'm sure that regardless of what happens here, we'll do our best to support it to the best of our ability. But I think this is just one more issue that brings to the table where a governance review in the area needs to be considered. That you cannot continue to say that yes, you want the service, but no, you don't want to pay for it. That just does not fly over the course of time. And to think that a community of 6,500 can pay to provide the services to an area of this size is folly. It can't go on. There needs to be some equity, some fairness in this, or we're all going to lose out on this, some of the services that we want and need, quite frankly, in our communities.
Yep. I guess it begs the question, is the fair share being paid, you know, from the others? Is the contract worth more or should be more than what we're getting? Councillor Keith.
Yes, I was just, yes, thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to say, I was on the library board for a couple of terms. And over that time, I did see some developments occur. And I recall some years ago, there were some issues about contract services and whether other municipalities wanted to renew their service contract or not. There were examinations taken. There were taxpayers in those other municipalities that evidently, it seemed to me, my observations put pressure on. Yes, they wanted to be involved with the library and wanted that support. So I really do think that when one moment, whether it's election time or not election time, we can't have it both ways. We can't say 1 minute we want to work together and be team workers and work as a region, and then another time say, well, no, we don't want, I don't want to take a chance. No, we don't want to spend any more money. I think I don't even understand why the service contract would have been 2 years, why it wouldn't have been annual, but I know I'm not sitting on board, but I do think there's an opportunity to be creative. As for the ownership of the building, I mean, that has been known. Anybody who's been on the board, that has been known for years. And the town, yes, I recall in 2 terms of being on the library board, that the town contributed not only in X number of dollars, but in lieu of, whether it was to do with human resources, advice being given. The town has been a really good contributor. So I think it's time that other municipalities become more aware and be asked to contribute, because all of us are in the same boat. So we need to pull together. And I don't feel that the library is just the town of Parry Sound. So creativity, and we either work as a group this way, or obviously changes are going to eventually come about, because all of us know, as Councillor Borneman already said, but it's common sense. You only got you've got a pie, and we can only cut it in so many pieces. So let's get working together.
Councillor McCann.
Well, I want to agree with what Councillor Borneman said. Yes, we all want the service, and not everybody wants to pay for it. And there is a solution to that, but that's not here tonight to figure out and resolve. People, with all due respect to Councillor Keith, I'd say at least the last, over the years, we've had different people, we've had different modes of thinking. Times have changed, and money just seems to be getting tighter and tighter all the time. And I would remind everyone that as we anticipated tax base growth in our own area, the same thing is happening outside this area. I must respectfully disagree that this is not a district library. This is a Parry Sound district. This is a Parry Sound town library. We own it. We are responsible for it. And we have to, we could sell that building tomorrow, and then where would we go? I'm saying, as Councillor Bachman has said, we have people on the board who will burn out, and then all you have left basically are the reps and from each municipality, and basically from Parry Sound and from our contract subscribers. And it's such an onerous deal to go to these people and say, you've got to, maintain this building and the expense of it. I think the library does a good service, and yes, the town has been most supportive over the years. Most of us didn't realize, none of us realized that we own the building until, I think, and Councillor Vanessa Backman can correct me on this, but I think it's only been within the last year that we realized we didn't own the building, or that we did own the building. I'm sorry, all flustered here. And we've been very appreciative of the support from the town. But as we move forward, again, I have to speculate. Service contract revenue is precarious at the best of times, and with the other municipalities growing, if they decided that, well, because we're going to spend this kind of money, maybe we just should do our own thing. And Seguin's done it, and McKellar's done it. I just think we need to look at the fact that this is a Parry Sound thing. Yes, the town owns the Stocky Center and the Bobby Orr Community Center, but it does have the benefit of users and patrons from outside this area. The library does, yes, but people pay for that through the contract services. And this, we're comparing apples and oranges here. So that's all I can say at this point, anyhow.
Councillor McCann, do you think these service contracts are paying enough?
Well,
I'm just asking your opinion.
I think they could perhaps a little bit more, but it's what the market will bear. And it would be nice if we got a little bit more from them. But this is what I'm saying is this is not going to address the bigger problem in front of us, is that we have a building to sustain. And at some point, when you talk about your capital management, we're going to have to replace the building or put major work into it. And I just, those contract services are not going to be enough to keep this particular building, as it is. I don't, Councillor Backman, would you agree with that?
I would just say it comes down to the question of how much they value that service. And, if depending on what the repairs are, but again, $50,000, I think there are definitely, I know there are solutions. There is funding. We've seen it come through. It's just, again, when the town has to maintain all of this infrastructure, there's only so many pots of funding. And that's why, again, going back out to these municipalities, maybe figuring out a strategy for long-term sustainability is critical. And that is something, unfortunately, we had, over $36,000 of losses due to COVID in 2 years. Obviously, that's a significant portion of this budget. Now, again, there's new legislation that libraries are supposed to reap the rewards of development fees and charges in communities. We haven't even began to have those discussions. Development charges are amongst all municipalities and even service contractors. So, again, I'm confident there's a solution. I don't think this ask, would be any different from past asks in the sense of the investment that the town has been the top end. And I think it supports the argument that when we go to have the larger conversation that Councillor Boardman has had, that maybe this has to be taken back to the mayor's table. Maybe the CAOs need to get together and have this wider conversation. I don't know. I'm more than willing to participate and be a voice and represent the town of Parry Sound and help mitigate the negative impact of these costs through sourcing grants. And I do that. But again, there was, the pay equity, which was a rather large increase that wasn't. And maybe we need to review what Councillor Keith said and look at these going back to the annual contracts. So, again, I think moving forward, there's positive solutions, but it is just one of those hits that under the circumstances, it's our reality today we face.
Councillor Borneman.
So we're not going to resolve this evening with respect to contributions from other people. That's not possible, obviously. My greater, $50,000, $58,000 is a lot of money, but that's something that's the tip of the iceberg, as Councillor Bachman has been saying. sustainability doesn't look like the town carrying the capital costs for any major replacements, repairs, building additions, whatever that come forward when it's not our property. Even though it's within the town of Parry Sound, we have lots of places to spend money. So I'd be willing to, personally, I only speak for myself, obviously, but I'd be willing to move forward with this item tonight on the basis that it doesn't prejudice future budgets, that the board go back to their partners based on the 2021 budget and say, hey, listen, this is what's coming down the pike with respect to pay equity and capital investments that are needed. And, you know, the town's willing to pay its share, but you folks need to do the same. Otherwise, you know, there will be consequences to the services that we're able to offer here. But, you know, I'm not willing to sit here tonight and commit the taxpayer of the town of Parry Sound to a whole bunch of things that we're not aware of at this point and have no real means of costing going forward. There needs to be a discussion, and it needs to be at a bigger table to work out an agreement here that's fair to everyone, not just you know, look at Parry Sound as the golden goose.
Yeah. Councillor McCann.
Yeah, and I would support what Councillor Borneman just put forward there, and hopefully Councillor Beckman is of the same mindset. Mr. Mayor, you asked whether or not they're paying their fair share. More is always great. You know, price is always great when it's more. But again, as I stress, it's what those markets will bear down the line. So I think what Councillor Borneman has suggested tonight is the very middle we can be in and go from there at this point.
Yep. Yep.
But it is a serious discussion to come
It is.
in the near future.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so
just one more thing, Mr.
yeah,
Mayor,
sure.
Before we leave this, I would hope that discussion takes place well before the 2023 budget debates start, and that everyone, whoever's sitting at this table, has knowledge of what's going on ahead of time. So as we can either come to a consensus at this table to say, okay, yeah, that's a good deal or not, and give direction to our board members, whoever they might be at that time, that it's time to start looking for broader support from the people who are contracting services from us.
Councillor Keith.
Yes, so just for clarity's sake, is it the understanding that even with roughly the 58,000 that the town would be supporting for this one time only, that the other municipalities are going to be approached this year for this budget to see if they are able to provide more funding for this budget for 2022 year for their municipalities? Is that part of the picture?
Councillor Bachman.
Councillor Keith, I will more than willing bring that motion to the next board meeting to put that on the table for a vote. But it has been discussed, and I think it was relatively, half and half, I would say. But on the latter, it is unfortunate that those municipal reps do feel that they are paying their share. So again, we will bring that motion at our next meeting, and I will follow up with staff. And I've also just sent you a history of what we've been kind of undergoing, which relates to what Councillor Borneman spoke to. And I do want to just let council know that our CAO and the chair of our board have been in thorough discussions with Mr. Harris and Ms. Phillips in regards to, sustainability and the challenges that we face, and, to try and at least enable staff to understand where these financial matters are. So I just want to let staff or council be aware of that.
Okay, so thank you. So we've been through this. Are there any other questions with regard to the budget itself? Not really. Ms. Phillips, so if what you proposed, does that include the library and the museum? And our budget comes in at 2.95%, is that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it does include the request from the library as well as the museum.
Okay. So we have a resolution that is prepared. Are there any other questions that you have on any other portion of the budget right at the moment? Or should I call the question on the resolution? Oh, Ms. Phillips and then Councillor Backman.
Just a question. So there were some items for council consideration. Is the resolution you're going to read to approve the budget?
That's the one that I have.
Okay, so there were a few more items here just for council's consideration. So I'll just share that quickly then maybe
Okay,
before
please.
we move to the question. Okay.
Yep, please. Yeah. While she's switching up the screen there, Councillor Backman, what was your question?
Well, I just wanted to say before we went to vote, thank you to staff for doing the work that they did with this budget. I understand that, the increase of the 0.5% at the library and fitting it in there to go under 2.95%, which was still below, as Mr. Harris stated, our October 5th resolution of coming in between, I think it was 3% and 7%. So I just like to say good job.
Thank you. Okay, so what council's looking at here is, so number 1, number 2, those are included in the proposed budget. So if council approves the proposed budget, those will be included. There were 2 more items that council wished to discuss as part of the budget discussions, which were the outdoor skating trail and the waterfront master plan. So the skating trail isn't recommended at this time, but there is more information available to council within those options. Just one moment. So we're on page 45 of the budget book, if you'd like to turn there.
Sorry, what? Oh, page 45?
Yeah, page 45. Okay. So there's some additional background information provided about the outdoor skating trail within that section of the budget. So as council works to keep tax increases down, staff don't recommend pursuing the outdoor skate pass as a new service at this time. And the cost impacts wouldn't impact 2022 budget. So if council had any additional questions, I'm not sure on that. And then the waterfront master plan, that was to reevaluate the waterfront strategy to plan for the future use of the properties along the shoreline of Georgian Bay. So staff were recommending that the project be deferred to 2023 once we have a new planner on site as well, that can be up to speed with what needs to be undertaken there.
Question?
Okay,
Yes.
I've got a couple of questions here. So Councillor Bachman had her hand up first, and then
Okay.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Stephanie, for these items for consideration. When I learned that the Waterfront Master Plan wasn't part of the budget, through some investigation, I realized that some other communities have received funding for their Waterfront Master Plan. I think that realistically, I would like to see the recreation master plan be completed prior the Waterfront Master Plan, and I don't think we have the resources at this time to do them simultaneously. I think with the investment that will be expected from us at near $2 million for our recreation and cultural center, I think it's critical as we move into the next stages of this project. So I would support deferring it, but I would really like to see if council could secure funding in this year to try and move it forward. It would be unfortunate if we went to a new council later this year and that was something that was pulled, because I feel that everybody on this council supported this, and what I recall from the conversations felt it was important. And I think also with where we are with our Waterfront committee that is just starting and getting together, I think the timing for 2023 would be good. But I do really want to see somehow if we can go after funding for this in the 2022 year.
Councillor McCann?
Well, I think I was just going to say the timing, by deferring it, the timing might be good. Does this give, and I guess I'm looking for a bit of education here, the Waterfront Advisory Committee a bit of a chance to commence with its responsibility and mandate to determine what may be needed and contribute towards that plan? Am I correct in saying that this kind of gives us a bit of time?
Yes, for you, Mr. Mayor, I think it does give you a bit of time, and the Waterfront Master Plan is also being discussed as part of a DC background study, and whether or not that can be something that could be funded partly through growth-related components of the study. So it's under discussion as well as to how we might fund that. But clarity in determining the mandates of what would be wanted with the plan would go a long way, probably.
Great, great. Thank you.
Sounds good. Councillor Borneman.
I can't see who's on and who isn't, Mr. Mayor, or at least not all of them. I'm like you, but my recollection with respect to the outdoor skating trail was that we agreed not to proceed at this time, but we had asked that there be information provided to us with respect to staffing and equipment needs, so as if Mother Nature allows at the tail end of 2022 or 23, that we be able to do a skating trail, that we would be in fact in position to do that. To see nothing isn't my memory of that conversation exactly. So, that there's no money in there is one thing, but it seems like we have no plan to proceed in that direction either. And if that stands, we'll be in the same position a year from now as we are tonight.
I guess Mr. Kearns.
Your worship, certainly, sir. I can speak to the item. So we did discuss it and what it would possibly take to be able to provide such a service. And we were looking at probably a 1.3 three full-time equivalent staff year-round. So there was some talk about, there was initial discussions there because the staff complement that's available at the BOCC is dedicated to the BOCC operations. The initial discussions this year surrounding the possibility of a skate path we had talked about at Kinsman Park possibly. That had a lot to do with the, unfortunately, the pandemic shutdown at Christmas time. And there was certainly a great deal of uncertainty amongst everyone, user groups, staff, municipalities, as to whether we were all hopeful, and thankfully, the season was able to start back up at the end of January. But in anticipation of perhaps an extended shutdown similar to 2021, there was some discussion as to whether outdoor amenities could be put in place for the year, to give folks an opportunity for that kind of recreational activity outside. That didn't materialize with the reopening. When staff looked at it, we're dealing with, obviously, that it was mentioned previously about the inflationary increases that everyone is facing this year. Increasing staff complement without fully analyzing, how that staff was going to be efficiently deployed year round, it became a bit of a challenge for this year. So I'm going to say that I think there are some other opportunities that were discussed, and I think council had mentioned them for other outdoor possible winter activities, amenities within the municipality elsewhere. Staff also, given the challenges of the location, the outdoor ballpark, whether it would be in the ballpark or the soccer field itself, we're going to pose some pretty significant challenges in keeping the ice open with the staffing and equipment complement that we had. So that's why you didn't see the actual numbers, because it was going to involve at least one full-time staff equivalent, permanent, as well as potentially some, I believe we are looking at 18-week part-time positions to be able to feasibly look at providing that service.
Councillor Bachman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cairns, for the explanation. So based on where we go with the master recreation plan, is this something that we would then potentially look at a need and allocate it into that plan, and then we would allocate budget in 2023? I mean, I know that our budget comes out again, sometimes I've seen historically we've started budget discussions in December, and I think our timing is decreased into the new year. But I'm just wondering, like, how do we get to that point where we can look at, and I'm just wondering, does that really have to be part of a plan, or is this something that, how do we make these recreation amenities available in our community?
Through your worship, I would suggest that it's probably best born from a master plan process, perhaps, to identify the need, the wants, and to make sure it's a sustainable service that we're going to be providing in the long run. It's a significant investment. If you're looking at increasing full-time equivalents and deploying equipment to support those kinds of activities. And I guess one of the things that we looked into a little bit more is the length of season, because it's so highly variable. The weather conditions are challenging at best for outdoor unprotected ice, unrefrigerated ice as well. So those are things that we started to look at in terms of sustainability and feasibility, and perhaps the recreation master planning process is perhaps one of the better processes to feed into the information that council can use to make those decisions.
Yes, Councillor Bachman.
Just as a follow-up and going back to our previous discussions about this specific item and potentially about volunteers, and what had occurred to me after the meeting was to engage volunteers, sometimes it's better to have a committee. And I'm just wondering if that might be something staff looks at, is potentially getting a committee, maybe specific for this project, but also we talked about other, potentials, the croquis curl, and maybe there's a winter activity or, and maybe that comes from the plan. But I think having some type of subcommittee or ad hoc committee that is focused on this particular project is really what I've been learning through my time here, is that what creates the success of these types of projects when engaging the volunteers. So that is the only other recommendation I would make to try and see this happen.
Okay. Councillor Barneman, have you got anything more you want to add to that, or?
Well, I'll look forward to seeing the recreation master plan. I think it's quite frankly, it's disappointing that we can't move forward, but I appreciate that we do need to be counting pennies and making sure that we're getting good use out of the monies that we spend. So if it means waiting another year to see a rec master plan and deciding whether or not and how to proceed with this, I can certainly live with that. I just hope it doesn't fall through the cracks in that process.
Okay. Councillor Keith.
Well, I'm just going to say, with no offense to the present mayor, I recall some terms back, hearing from a former councillor who had been, of course, the mayor at one point, saying about needs and wants. We've just gone through quite a bit of issues in respect to COVID and how we're trying to cope with that and recognize the tightness of the situation. And it just seems to me it would be more prudent to look at what are our needs and then put aside our wants. The recreation plan, the waterfront master plan, yes, they are important. They're a want. They are not a need when we're trying to get to a 2.9% budget. So I just think that we should just go this year with trying to keep things where they are in a tight sort of situation, because frankly, we don't know what's going to happen. We can't predict that well, even with COVID right now. So I think we have to keep that in mind.
I think the recreation one, part of it was already in a previous budget, so it's just been delayed for one reason or another. So anyway, Ms. Phillips, you got any more you want to add?
Yes, there was, so knowing that there's a lot of cost pressures on the community or cost pressures related to COVID-19, staff have provided a couple additional options for council if they wanted to further reduce the tax rate. So I just want to share what those options would be.
Okay.
And then we would be at the end of today's presentation, hopefully after that. We're getting close. Okay, so there are two options that are provided within the proposed budget. Option one relates to guarded beaches or lifeguards. So this So guarded beaches aren't considered mandatory for municipalities in Ontario, but so in order to provide unguarded beaches, there's a few steps that we would need to take, including proper signage, and the town has, as well as regular inspections of the beach area and equipment that whether it remains on site and would have to be inspected to make sure that the equipment's still there. Many municipalities are being challenged with finding willing and qualified lifeguarding staff, especially during COVID-19. So that option, if council were to choose not to have guarded beaches, would reduce the tax rate impact at 0.4%. The operating cost of having guarded beaches is approximately $46,000 for the labor and impacts within the operating budget. And that would be $5.63 on each 100,000 of residential assessment. Does council have any questions related to that option?
Can you kind of bring back to the full screen so I can see everybody? Because
there we go.
I think there's definitely an option there if it's not mandatory. Councilor McCann.
So two questions. One, how did we fare last summer in finding people to work as lifeguards? Did we have a full complement last summer?
I'd like to defer that to Mr. Kearns. I don't know. Mr. Kearns, do you have any
my first
additional
question,
operating
yeah.
information?
I'm certainly through your worship. I'm not sure that we had a full complement comparable to previous years, but we had an adequate complement to operate a guarded beach. We did not have a swim program last year though. So that was a little bit, well, over the last 2 years, it's been quite different. But we did find lifeguard staff, willing staff to work there, yes.
Okay, so there's a possibility that we may not be able to hire a full complement. So even if we budgeted for this, is it like, could we have some monies left over? Then I think what I'm thinking of is it's such a small portion of the budget, and you can't speak enough to providing safety to our kids in the water. So I don't. Are there lifeguards at both beaches, the old Wabano beach as well as the new beach, or just the new beach?
Just the new beach.
Just the new beach, yeah. So it's so shallow at the new beach. I would think we'd want one at the other one instead, but that's the way it is.
Councillor Keith and then Councillor Borneman.
Yes, well, from my viewpoint, I would say that we could reduce the budget by not having a guarded beach. It seemed to me last year with COVID-19, those people that were going to swim did their best to respect COVID-19 and distanced themselves from other people. But when we know that other municipalities have already given this a try, and there is the ability for us to do it with proper signage, etc., I think we should give this a try for 1 year. And I think it also sends a message that we are trying to do the best we can with the dollar and keeping things as tight as possible. So I think when legally we are allowed to do it, why not try it 1 year? The Centennial Beach, or what's called the Old Town Beach, has been surviving for years without a lifeguard. And and it's a much, as Councillor McCann said, and I know from swimming, that it definitely is much deeper. The water is a lot deeper than over at the Wabano Beach. So I would say take the guarded beach out.
Councillor Borneman.
That is my first inclination as well. But I do have one question before we go there. Would and I'm not sure if Mr. Cairns can answer this or if Miss McNamara can or not, if she's here, but would that impact on the designation that the Newtown Beach has had the past?
Blue flag, the blue
Yes.
flag.
Yes, the blue flag designation.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I just wonder
Good
how it
question.
would be, because that's certainly advantageous.
Through your worship, I can speak to it a little bit. We've had some discussions over the last couple of years about the Blue Flag program, because my understanding is it changed organizations under which it was being administered. And I'm not sure that it was in place last year and to the same extent that it was previous. So I perhaps I don't have a full and complete answer on that, but I know we've had some internal discussions on the nature of that program and whether it was still the same program that it originally started as.
Okay, interesting.
Who
Councillor
knew,
Bachman.
Mr. Cairns?
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Your Worship.
yep.
Just one question for maybe Mr. Cairns. I don't know if Ms. McNamara is on this evening, but just in regards to the fitness trail repair, we discussed at the last budget meeting. I'm just wondering, was the Rotary Club approached to support any part of, participate and or support any part of this project?
Through your worship, not this particular one because it is, I believe, 100% funded, or the funding came from, I forget which program it is right now.
I think there is a portion, but maybe did that come from our reserve stuff and Ms. Phillips?
There was, through you, Mr. Mayor, there was a portion that council had approved within the budget. So initially we, 50,000 was approved for fitness trail repairs. And then since then, with the additional funding, we will receive 187,500 in grant funding. And then the town will contribute an additional 12,500 for our portion of the fitness trail renovations and improvements there. So the funding is identified as federal funding. So I think it was under FedNor or something like that, but I'm not 100% sure.
Mr. Harris was waving his hand.
So for the fitness trail funding, Ms. McNamara sent an email last week indicating that between the 50,000 that council had already approved for the fitness trail and the FedNor grant, we weren't in need of additional funding. So Rotary wasn't approached because we had enough to do the scope that we wanted to cover. From a consultation point of view, the Waterfront Advisory Committee, which has now been created, is to the extent there's any public consultation on what we might be doing on the waterfront trail, would come through the Waterfront Advisory Committee rather than the Rotary.
Okay, so it may be a good idea to have advisors maybe to the committee because they do play an integral role in it being the Rotary Algonquin fitness trail. And I think they do have access to fundings for that type of support. Yeah. So that's just the only comment I would make in a suggestion.
Yeah, and certainly we can make an effort to advise the Rotary when there's the next Waterfront Advisory Committee meeting, and Rotary members can attend and participate in that discussion, similar to participating in a council meeting.
Absolutely, great idea. Thanks.
Okay, is there anyone else want to comment on the lifeguards at the beach? No? So I'm going to ask for a show of hands of those willing to take that out of the budget. So if you raise your hand, it comes out of the budget. Okay, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5 coming out. So, okay. Ms. Phillips, I think you've got one more item on that.
Yes. Okay, so the second item that's an option here is a climate change coordinator intern. So this position is included in the proposed budget and is important to as a resource to further its energy reduction and climate change goals. So the town's working towards implementation of a 5-year conservation and demand management plan, and there are forthcoming climate action plans being developed, and council has expressed a goal for to be net zero. So right now in the proposed budget, 50% of the position is funded. There's a few programs that we're looking at as possibilities to get funding for the position. So the position going forward would be contingent upon receiving that funding. So the net of funding, the cost impact of having the position remain in the budget would be 23,307. So if it were removed, the tax rate impact would be a reduction of 0.20 or 0.199 or $2.83 on residential assessment of $100,000. Are there any more questions about that resource?
Councillor McCann.
I have one, yeah. Have we made any commitments to any of the organizations that would come under this? Have we made promises to
I'd like
help out in
to,
any way?
I'll defer to Mr. Pengra. I'm sure he has some additional information to provide on the resource.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In regards to commitments to third-party organizations, no, not so much. Council has committed to the 5-year conservation and demand management plan specifically, and there's quite a number of projects and tasks listed within that 5-year conservation and demand management plan. If you're interested in refreshing your memory on that, it is on the website, as was required by the province. Specifically in regard to commitments, though, council did commit to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection program, but that commitment is for setting targets and creating a climate action plan. And so the climate action plan itself is well underway, as it has been for the last 2 years that we've been working on it. The items that will be coming forth as part of the climate action plan, some of which complement the 5-year conservation and demand management plan that council has already adopted, but there will be additional items, including items regarding adaptation planning, which is essentially planning for the known effects of climate change that we're already seeing. And there will be specific targets that we will be setting and that we are working on setting presently as part of the climate action plan. Did I answer that?
Oh, it's very good. It's very good.
Councillor Bornman.
So Forrest, this relates directly to council's commitment to the ice cap organization. This relates directly to our net zero emissions hope, I'll say, target. That's the word I'm looking for, target down the road. To me, yes, this would be easy to cut from the budget and probably no one would notice except us. No one would know. But to me, this is we've talked the talk with respect to climate change and setting these targets, or trying to set these targets, and joining groups and making commitments. But this is how many of those initiatives will get delivered without actually, I give Mr. Pengra, I don't want that to sound bad, I give Mr. Pengra full credit for getting as far as we have with this. He and others have worked very hard on this, but without some actual boots on the ground, delivering on day-to-day tasks will take far longer to deliver on the things that we've already committed to than what we might with this assistance. So I'll be supporting this 100%, and I hope council will as well. I think it serves the community well into the future, and will enable us to achieve some of the goals that we've set for ourselves.
Councillor Keith?
Yes, thank you. I won't be, shall we say, as wordy as Councillor Borneman, but the saying is, or the old saying is, the proof is in the pudding. If we're going to support climate change and be net zero, we got to show what we're saying. And this certainly does indicate it's an opportunity to provide education in climate change, not only operational and capital planning, but it lets the taxpayer in the community, other people who become interested, to see we are taking this seriously. So let's get to it and do it. The proof is in the pudding. There's no point in us cutting this out of the budget and then saying, oh yeah, we really believe in it. Well, you lost all your credibility. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Bachman.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I'll just reiterate briefly what Councillor Keith said. I think we've made the commitment to net zero, and the time and investment that staff has made to ensure that we get there. This is the only way forward. So yes, I fully support this.
Anything further? So show of hands to keep it in. Okay, it's in. So there was just the two items, correct, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, that's correct.
So it puts our tax rate where?
So we would be at
Increase.
2.56% if we, since we remove the guarded beach.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. Well, it looks like we're removing the guards at the beach, so
Mhm.
I guess we're at 2.56%. Anything else from anybody? Yes, Phillips?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I know we didn't discuss them in detail, but they are still a notable portion of our budget. So there are other service areas such as water and wastewater, and the Stockey Center budget, as well as land ambulance. So those have a net impact of $0 on property taxes for 2022. But I just wanted to throw it out there in case council had any questions related to the variances in the budget in that section.
Well, that's why I asked at the beginning of the meeting. I hoped everybody read their budget, because if they've got questions on those, fire them out, because it'll take another 2 hours to go through each one of those things. So, and as you said, it's a net impact of 0. So any questions on the other items that Ms. Phillips mentioned? No? Okay. And as far as the public goes, that information will be on the town's website. Correct, Ms. Phillips?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it'll be on the website, and the variances are well noted within the proposed budget, so they can seek that information as they wish as well.
So the information's there for everyone to see. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I want to see a show of hands if everybody's good with the 2.56%. Okay, that's good.
Mr. Mayor, is it 2.56?
I think that's what Ms. Phillips said.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so do I need to read the Councillor Borneman?
Miss Phillips, just out of curiosity, do you know what the cost of living, CPI, whatever metrics you go by, what was that for the last calendar year? We all read about inflation, and we all know that that impacts us the same as it does your budget at home. So can you tell me what our CPI index would have been for 2021?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So using the guidelines set from council, we would have gone with a July CPI rate as the guideline, and that was set at 3.5%. But as of December, the CPI rate from December was at 5.2%. So there is a significant impact on costs expected for the community. So the budget at 2.56%, including infrastructure, is well below inflationary levels expected for 2022.
Thank you.
Yep. Councillor McCann?
So then, Ms. Phillips, then, so under mayor and council remuneration, then you've got 4.8%. So that's lower than the inflation rate at this point. Is that correct then?
So that so the bylaw set by council for their remuneration was to use CPI as of a certain date. I believe it is January CPI rate. So the 4.8% that's in the budget there is using the guidelines set by council.
Okay.
So we use the same time period every year so that it
Right.
catches up and it's fair, and it uses the same from one date to another every year, so it's consistent.
Okay.
So that's
Okay.
the most important thing there.
So, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll read the resolution again. It was moved by Councillor Burden and seconded by Councillor Keith that the 2022 operating and capital budgets be approved and that the budget bylaw be brought forward to a future council meeting for ratification. Okay. Anyone opposed to that? No one's opposed. That's carried. Thank you. Now, I have moved by Councillor McCann. Well, before I go to this one, I just want to thank all staff for all their work into the budget. I mean, it takes every department and everyone to pull this together and create a budget, but to work the budget as well. And, work that through the whole year. And Ms. Phillips, as I said before, it's amazing what a director of finance has to learn in putting a budget together. They have to involve themselves in just every department within the organization. So thank you to you and your staff for pulling this together and getting it before council. And great job.
Thank you. Thanks to all the managers, directors, and my
Yes.
staff for helping me pull the budget book together, because it's
And
endeavor.
thanks to council too for their work and making sure that they were up to date on what was going on and asking questions and moving forward. And to our CAO as well, because I know he's got a hand in this budget as well. So moved by Councillor McCann and second by Councillor Backman that bylaw number 2022-7222 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council be considered as read a first time. All in favor? And that's carried. All members in favor of having the second and third readings? That's carried. Moved by Councillor Borneman, seconded by Councillor McCann, that the bylaw above mentioned be considered as read a second and third time, passed, signed, and sealed. All in favor? That's carried. And I've got, here we are. Prior to adjourning, I'd like to offer the following information to the public regarding the next council meeting. The next regular meeting of council for the town of Parry Sound is scheduled for Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at 7 p.m. The meeting will be held via Zoom video conferencing and will be live streamed and recorded. All regular council meetings are held at 7 p.m. on the first and third Tuesday of each month, except January and August, where only one regular meeting is scheduled. The council meeting schedule, notices of special council meetings, complete agendas and minutes, and instructions on accessing live streamed and recorded council meetings are all posted on the town's website. Go to www.parrysound.ca under news and public notices. Your TV airs council meetings on Saturday at 9:30 a.m. following a regular council meeting. And for Cogeco listings, contact www.yourtv.tv. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.